Welcome back to Cowboys Reality Check, the channel where we tell you what's actually happening with your Dallas Cowboys. No sugarcoating, no hype, just the real story. If this is your first time here, do us a favor right now and hit that subscribe button because we cover this team every single day and you do not want to miss what is coming. And if you're already part of the family, drop a comment down below and let us know how you're feeling about this George Pickens situation. Because today we're going deep on one of the most important and most uncertain storylines of the entire 2026 Cowboys offseason. Because here's the thing. The Cowboys did what they had to do. They placed the franchise tag on George Pickens back in late February, keeping him under contract for the 2026 season. On the surface, that should feel like a done deal. Relief. A star receiver locked in for another year while the organization works out the long-term extension. But if you have spent any time watching how Jerry Jones operates, and at this point, if you're on this channel, you absolutely have, you know that in Dallas, nothing is ever that simple. And right now, we are already watching the seeds of another potential offseason disaster being planted right before our eyes. So today we're going all the way in on the George Pickens situation. We're going to talk about what the franchise tag actually means in practical terms, why there is still so much uncertainty swirling around his future despite the tag being in place, what the contract numbers look like for a potential long-term deal, the massive elephant in the room that is agent David Mulugheta, what Jerry Jones has been saying publicly, and perhaps more importantly, what he has not been saying, and why this situation has Cowboys fans feeling a very familiar and very uncomfortable sense of déjà vu. We're going to break every piece of it down, put the facts on the table, and give you an honest assessment of where this whole thing is headed. Let's get into it. First, let's set the scene on exactly who George Pickens is and why this situation matters so profoundly for the Cowboys going into 2026. Because if you have not been paying close attention to what Pickens did in his first season in Dallas, let me paint the picture for you. The Cowboys acquired Pickens from the Pittsburgh Steelers back in May of 2025 in exchange for a 2026 third-round pick and a 2027 fifth-round selection. In hindsight, that trade looks like one of the greatest heists in recent Cowboys history. And what Pickens went on to do in his debut season in Dallas was nothing short of spectacular. Playing in all 17 games with 15 starts, Pickens hauled in 93 catches on 137 targets for 1,429 yards and 9 touchdowns, earning Pro Bowl honor for the first time in his career and landing on the second-team All-Pro squad. His receiving yards ranked third in the entire NFL. He had 13 catches of at least 25 yards and 73 first-down receptions, both ranking in the top 5 in the league. He set a Dallas Cowboys franchise record with 5 games of at least 130 yards receiving and a touchdown catch. And he did all of this while playing alongside CeeDee Lamb, meaning defenses could not simply lock in on one receiver and shut him down. When Lamb missed time with a high ankle sprain, Pickens stepped into the WR1 role without flinching, putting up multiple 100-yard performances and showing the entire NFL that he is capable of carrying a passing offense when asked. Think about what that means for this offense going forward. You have Dak Prescott under center. You have CeeDee Lamb on one side. And you have George Pickens, 24 years old, Pro Bowl, All-Pro, on the other. That is one of the most dangerous offensive trios in football. And the Cowboys need to figure out how to keep it together. Now let's talk about the franchise tag itself and exactly what it means in practical terms, because there are details here that are important to understand. The Cowboys used a non-exclusive franchise tag designation on Pickens. What that means is that Pickens is permitted to negotiate with other NFL teams, but the Cowboys retain the right to match any offer he receives. If Dallas chooses not to match an offer sheet that Pickens signs with another team, the acquiring team would be required to send Dallas 2 first-round draft picks as compensation. So the Cowboys have real leverage here. Any team trying to acquire Pickens would have to pay an enormous price in draft capital, which makes a sign-and-trade scenario unlikely unless an absolutely desperate team decides he is worth the cost. With the 2026 salary cap coming in at an historic $301.2 million, Pickens' one-year franchise tag salary comes out to $27.298 million, fully guaranteed. The two sides have until July 15th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time to agree on a multi-year contract extension. if no deal is reached by that deadline. Pickens plays out 2026 on the tag and becomes an unrestricted free agent the following offseason. That July 15th deadline is the date that everyone inside and outside the organization is watching, because that is when this situation either gets resolved cleanly or gets really, really messy. And here is where the uncertainty is already beginning to show up in ways that should make Cowboys fans uncomfortable. Head coach Brian Schottenheimer was asked at the NFL owners' meetings in Phoenix about whether Pickens would attend the Cowboys' voluntary offseason program, set to begin on April 20th. And his answer was not the confident, reassuring response you want to hear from your head coach about one of your best players. Schottenheimer said he has been in contact with Pickens, but has no assurances that he will be there. He said that the process is still playing out, that it is all voluntary, and that he has not pushed the issue. Now read between the lines on that. A head coach who cannot tell you with confidence that his Pro Bowl wide receiver is going to show up for voluntary workouts is essentially telling you that the relationship between Pickens and the organization has conditions attached to it right now. There's leverage being applied. And while voluntary workouts are just that, voluntary, the signal it sends is significant. This is not a guy who is locked in, comfortable, and ready to go. This is a situation in progress. Let's talk about the money now, because the contract numbers are really at the heart of everything happening here. The Cowboys are already paying CeeDee Lamb $34 million per year on the extension he signed back in 2024, a deal that included $100 million in guaranteed money. They are paying Dak Prescott $60 million annually as the highest-paid quarterback in the league. They have Tyler Smith locked up as one of the highest-paid interior offensive linemen in football at $23.4 million per year. And they're working on a new deal for Pro Bowl kicker Brandon Aubrey, who Jerry Jones himself said deserves to be the highest-paid kicker in the NFL. So where does that leave George Pickens on the pay scale? Well, that is exactly the problem. Consider what is happening around the receiver market right now. Among the top receivers in the league by statistical output, 3 of them are already earning $40 million or more per year in 2026. One is at $30 million. And then there is Pickens, a receiver who averaged 15.4 yards per catch, who put up 1,429 receiving yards, who is one of only 13 players in the entire league to average more than 15.0 yards per reception, sitting on a $27.3 million franchise tag. The Cowboys are getting a massive bargain right now, but Pickens and his agent know exactly what that means. When negotiations for a long-term deal begin in earnest, you better believe his representation is going to come in with numbers that reflect Pickens' actual market value, not the Cowboys' cap convenience. Former Cowboys receiver and current analyst Jesse Holley made the argument publicly that Pickens' agent should walk into Jerry Jones' office and open negotiations at $41.5 million per year, the benchmark set by Jackson Smith-Njigba's recent extension with the Seattle Seahawks. Holley said it plainly. If the agent does not start there, he is doing his client a disservice. Now, that is a starting point in a negotiation, not a final number. But the fact that a knowledgeable analyst is putting Pickens in that conversation tells you everything about the gap that likely exists between what the Cowboys want to pay and what Pickens believes he is worth. And when you factor in that a properly structured long-term extension could actually reduce Pickens' annual cap hit significantly below the $27.3 million tag number, the Cowboys actually have a financial incentive to get a long-term deal done sooner rather than later. The math is there for a deal to get done. What is less certain is whether the egos and the negotiating dynamics allow it to happen. And now we absolutely have to talk about the biggest storyline underneath this whole contract situation, the one that is making Cowboys fans genuinely nervous, and that is the presence of agent David Mulugheta. Because you simply cannot understand what is happening with the George Pickens extension talks without understanding what happened with the Micah Parsons extension talks a year ago. David Mulugheta of Athletes first represents George Pickens. He also represented Micah Parsons. And if you remember what happened with Parsons last offseason, you know how that story ended, and it did not end well for the Cowboys. Jerry Jones claimed at the time that he had reached what amounted to a verbal agreement with Parsons directly, a deal that Jones believed would make Parsons the highest-paid defensive player in the NFL. But when Parsons actually consulted with Mulugheta, the agent made it clear that whatever Jones thought they had agreed upon was nowhere close to what Parsons was actually going to sign. Talks collapsed completely. Parsons skipped the off-season program. He showed up to training camp in Oxnard, but essentially staged a hold-in, attending meetings while refusing to practice. And then, 1 week before the 2025 season kicked off, the Cowboys traded Micah Parsons to the Green Bay Packers for 2 first-round picks. Parsons then signed a 4-year, $188 million deal in Green Bay with $120 million guaranteed. Gone. Just like that. One of the best defensive players in the NFL, gone from Dallas because Jerry Jones and David Mulugheta could not find a way to make it work. Now fast forward to today. George Pickens has the same agent. And when the Cowboys placed the franchise tag on Pickens in February, Jerry Jones went out of his way to address that fact directly. He said publicly that he has no issues working with Mulugheta, that the Cowboys met with Pickens representatives at the NFL Scouting Combine, and that everything was professional and cordial. That all sounds fine. But then Jones said something that immediately set off alarm bells for every Cowboys fan who watched the Parsons situation go sideways. When asked by NFL Network insider Mike Garafolo whether Pickens wanted negotiations to go through Mulugheta, Jones confirmed he had no problem with that, and then added that if Pickens worked without an agent, he would save a lot of money. Then Jones paused and added 2 words, "with me." Now maybe that was a joke. Jerry Jones has a particular sense of humor, and he sometimes says things with a wink that come out sounding worse than intended. But in context, given what happened with Parsons, given that this is the same agent, given that Jones tried to negotiate directly with Parsons and bypass Mulugheta, those words do not land as a harmless quip. They land as a signal of exactly how Jones is thinking about these negotiations. Cowboys fans immediately recognized the pattern. Social media lit up. People were drawing direct parallels between what Jones said about Pickens now and what he did with Parsons before. And Mulugheta is fully aware of that playbook. He lived through it. He watched Jones try to use it on his client. He is not going to let it happen again. To his credit, George Pickens himself has been smart and composed in how he has handled this publicly. When asked about the Parsons situation and whether it worried him, Pickens was clear and measured, essentially saying that he and Micah Parsons are different people in different situations and that he trusts his agent to handle the business side of things. He said he feels completely prepared for whatever these negotiations bring. And part of that preparation, reportedly, is counsel from Dak Prescott, the Cowboys' longest-tenured player, a man who himself went through 2 grueling and contentious contract negotiations with Jerry Jones before ultimately getting paid. Prescott knows how Jones operates better than almost anyone inside that building. And the fact that he is in Pickens' corner, offering guidance and perspective, is genuinely meaningful. It means Pickens is going into this with his eyes wide open. There is also the human element here that matters beyond just the contract numbers. By all credible accounts, George Pickens genuinely loves Dallas. He loves playing with Dak Prescott. He loves playing alongside CeeDee Lamb. He loves the city, the organization, the locker room culture. When Jerry Jones called him the day before placing the franchise tag to give him advance notice, Stephen Jones, the Cowboys COO and co-owner, said that Pickens was fired up, thrilled that he was staying in Dallas, enthusiastic about his future with the team. Schottenheimer has said repeatedly that Pickens loves it there, that the feeling is mutual, and that the team has long-term plans for him. All of that goodwill and genuine affection for the organization is real. It is not manufactured, but goodwill does not pay the bills. And even a player who genuinely wants to stay somewhere will eventually reach a breaking point if the organization is not showing him the respect he feels he has earned. Now, let's be honest about the complexity surrounding Pickens as a person, because it is part of the conversation whether we like it or not. Before he arrived in Dallas, Pickens had documented incidents in Pittsburgh, 2 unsportsmanlike conduct penalties in a single game, punting a ball into the stands after a score, a sideline altercation during a late-game situation. Those were real moments that contributed to the Steelers deciding his talent was not worth the distraction, which is ultimately why he became available for a third-round pick in the first place. In Dallas in 2025, Pickens was largely excellent. He stayed on the field, stayed out of serious trouble, and performed at an elite level all season long. But there were reportedly some issues with punctuality that the organization noticed and filed away. And when you're talking about committing to a player at $35 to $40 million per year for 4 or 5 years, those character questions absolutely factor into the organizational calculus. There are people inside the Cowboys building who feel that playing out 2026 on the franchise tag would give Dallas one more year to evaluate whether Pickens can sustain both his elite production and his improved conduct before making a long-term financial commitment of that magnitude. That is a legitimate organizational perspective. It is a reasonable way to think about it from a risk management standpoint. But here is the problem. If Pickens picks up on that line of thinking, if he gets any sense that the Cowboys are treating 2026 as a trial run before deciding his long-term future, that can very quickly poison the relationship. A Pro Bowl, all-pro receiver who just put up 1,429 yards his first season with the team does not want to be told he is still auditioning. And the moment he feels that way, the whole thing can unravel fast. This brings us to the theory that has been circulating in Cowboys coverage circles recently. The idea that the Cowboys might secretly be planning a one-and-done situation with Pickens. That the organization is essentially treating the 2026 season as a final window to run the Prescott-Lamb-Pickens trio together, maximize their offensive potential one last time, and then let Pickens walk in free agency if the extension negotiations do not resolve cleanly before July 15th. One respected analyst framed it in exactly those terms, calling the Cowboys' 2026 outlook a one-year window, noting that with a new defensive coordinator in Christian Parker and improved defensive depth, Dallas is a team capable of making a serious playoff run this season regardless of what happens with the long-term contract. Jerry Jones pushed back directly on that framing at the owners' meetings. He said emphatically that the Cowboys have long-term plans for Pickens and that there is no scenario in his mind where this is a one-year rental situation. And look, Jones says a lot of things. Some of those things turn out to be true. Some of those things turn out to be wishful thinking said out loud. The honest reality is that the Cowboys' financial position heading into 2026 is genuinely complicated. They have significant money committed to Prescott, Lamb, and multiple other starters. Signing Pickens to a market rate extension in that environment requires real creativity and real sacrifice elsewhere. It is not impossible, but it requires the kind of proactive, aggressive roster management that has not always been a hallmark of how Jerry Jones runs this franchise. The Cowboys' own history with the franchise tag does not exactly inspire confidence the long-term deal is imminent either. The last player they signed from a first-time franchise tag to a multi-year extension before the July 15th deadline was Dez Bryant, and that was all the way back in 2015. In the decades since, Dalton Schultz was tagged and left. Tony Pollard was tagged and left. DeMarcus Lawrence was tagged twice before eventually getting a deal. And Dak Prescott went through one of the most drawn-out and publicly contentious negotiations in recent Cowboys history before finally getting the contract he deserved. The franchise tag in Dallas has more often been a prologue to a departure than a bridge to a long-term commitment. That is simply the truth of the matter, and we are not going to pretend otherwise on this channel. And let's talk about what happens if this thing does go sideways. If the Cowboys cannot get Pickens signed before July 15th, he plays out the season on the tag. At that point, they can attempt to tag him again in 2027, but a second franchise tag would come in at 120% of the 2026 tag salary, pushing that number into the $33 million range or higher, depending on market movement. That is an increasingly expensive way to retain a player without giving him any long-term security, and it would be a source of ongoing frustration and resentment for Pickens throughout that entire process. The more likely outcome in that scenario is that Pickens plays out 2026. The Cowboys cannot or will not match whatever offer he receives in free agency, and he walks. And suddenly Dallas is right back where they were before the trade. A great quarterback, a great number one receiver in Lamb, and a gaping hole next to him that they spent a third-round pick and a full season of elite production to fill. So where does all of this leave us right now? Heading into April with the July 15th deadline looming. Here is how Nick sees it, and I'm going to be straight with you the way I always am on this channel. The Cowboys want George Pickens. George Pickens wants to be a Dallas Cowboy. Brian Schottenheimer wants him in this system. Dak Prescott wants him in this locker room. CeeDee Lamb wants him as a teammate. The desire to make this work is real and genuine on both sides. That matters. That is the foundation on which a deal can get built. But desire alone does not close a contract. Jerry Jones' history of dragging out negotiations for star players, combined with the specific and very recent history between his organization and David Mulugheta, creates a real and present danger that this situation deteriorates before it gets resolved. Every unnecessary comment Jones makes about agents saving players money. Every press conference answer that hedges rather than commits. Every day that passes without a signed extension while Pickens watches other receivers around the league cash in at $40 million plus per year. All of it adds pressure to a situation that is already operating at a high temperature. The Cowboys need to learn from what happened with Parsons. They need to approach this negotiation with respect for Pickens' representation, transparency about their financial intentions, and urgency that matches the importance of keeping one of the best wide receiver duos in football together. If they do that, if they move quickly and treat Pickens like the elite player his 2025 numbers proved he is, there's every reason to believe a deal gets done before July 15th. The franchise tag comes off the books, and the Cowboys go into 2026 with a locked-in, committed George Pickens ready to help this team make a deep playoff run. But if Jerry Jones plays games, if he tries to negotiate around the agent, if he lets the deadline creep up while talking in circles at press conferences about long-term plans without actually putting long-term offers on the table, if he treats the 2026 season as a one-year window and lets Pickens feel like an afterthought in the organization's long-term vision, well, we have seen that movie before. We know exactly how it ends. And it ends with George Pickens catching passes for someone else in 2027, while Cowboys fans ask themselves once again how Jerry Jones managed to let another elite player walk out the door. This is Cowboys Reality Check. We tell you what's actually happening. And right now, what's actually happening is that the Cowboys have a generational offensive talent under contract for 1 year, a negotiating history that should terrify any reasonable fan, and a July 15 deadline that will tell us everything we need to know about whether this organization has learned anything from the mistakes of the recent past. We will be watching every single development and breaking it down for you every step of the way. That is what we do here. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss a thing. And drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the Cowboys get this deal done? Do you trust Jerry Jones to handle this the right way?